The patient that I have is Mr. Keola Atkin. He is being ready for discharge. So I am doing teaching on his discharge. First, I'm going to start with his medication. So for discharge teaching on his medication, I would tell him to make sure that he is reading the label on his medication to make sure that it is the correct medication. Read the label and make sure that it's the correct dosage, and make sure that the discharge papers, the orders of how many to give himself, that he's comparing it with what's in the bottle. So, for instance, if he has, if his orders say to take 2 pills of one of his medication, make sure that he takes 2 instead of 1. Um, I will also tell him to check his vitals. For instance, he's on a blood pressure medication, so I would tell him to check his blood pressure before giving himself the medication, because if his blood pressure reading is too low, then he would not give that medication, and he would contact his primary care physician. Um, he's also on a medication for his irregular heartbeat. So I would also tell him to make sure within those vitals he's checking his pulse, and he know his pulse rate before giving himself medication. He's also on medication for pain. So as far as the pain medication, I would tell him to make sure that he's going by the correct label and he's giving himself the correct dose, and he's also waiting that time period frame before giving himself another dose of medication if he's still experiencing pain. Um, as far as nutritional, um, he likes Hawaiian food. So before he even gets discharged from the hospital, I would ask him what foods that he prefer, being that he likes Hawaiian foods. His diet is a low sodium diet, so I would basically give him instructions of foods that are low in sodium. So that way, the foods that he like, the Hawaiian foods that he can basically go by those foods that are low in sodium, to give himself, so that way he can be following his diet orders. Um, I would also tell Mr. Atkin to make sure that he stays up to date with his lab values. The lab values are um, critical in his medication also, because we don't want him to take have too much in his system, whereas he becomes toxic. Um, we want him to balance out, so that way, one of his medications is his potassium supplement. So knowing his lab values would help, because we want to balance out that potassium level. His digoxin level, the digoxin lowers the potassium, so taking a potassium supplement basically balances out his potassium level. But we always want to have labs, so that way he can know his lab values on his potassium level. Um, he also takes furosemide. Furosemide is a diuretic. Um, in his history, and before he was discharged, he had edema to his legs. Furosemide basically decrease the fluid in the legs. Furosemide is also a potassium wasting diuretic, so that is another reason for taking the potassium supplement to balance out. So we always want to have that supplement to balance out, because the digoxin, it lowers the potassium, and your furosemide lowers your potassium. So we don't want to be hypokalemia, so we're going to take that potassium supplement to balance out your potassium. Um, He also takes a high blood pressure medication, um, and he takes Tylenol as needed for pain. Um, as far as also with foods, besides having a low sodium diet, I can also tell him to take some foods that has potassium in it. So for the sodium, low sodium, you don't want to have anything that's high in sodium. Foods that are high in sodium are like your processed foods, your canned foods, your snacks. We want to stay away from those foods. Um, then your potassium, you have your avocados, bananas, and your citrus. Those are high in potassium. You want to take some of those because you're already taking a potassium supplement. That's why it's always good to monitor your lab values. Um, let's see what else. As far as his medication, when he takes his medication, he needs to make sure that he's taking his medication at the correct time that the physician ordered. So, for instance, uh, his furosemide, it says to take the furosemide daily. So, if he's taking that medication at 9 a.m. every morning, then we would want him to continue taking the furosemide at 9 a.m. every morning. And that's the same with the rest of the medication. For him to take his medication at the same time every day. The only way he would switch up with his medication is if he contact his healthcare provider and the healthcare provider tells him to switch up his medications. When he holds his medication, he needs to contact the physician and explain to the physician that I held my medication because my blood pressure was too low. So I held my blood pressure medication. And that way the physician may either put him on another blood pressure medication or tell him just continue to monitor his blood pressure and check his blood pressure the next day and see what it is. Um, let's see. For his medication, it might be a good idea for him to get a pill box. When he gets a pill box, he can take and put each medication on there. Since it's Monday through Friday, he can have a week supply, so he can start preparing his medication into his pill box. If he have any issues or question anything, he has his wife at home, so his wife can help him prepare his medication. His wife can help him check his blood pressure. Um, and his wife can also contact the physician with any instance. So he does has help at home with his wife, so his wife can help him do these things as far as with his medication. Um, with his nutrition, he likes to cook the food. Maybe his wife can cook the food, and we can do the teaching with him and his wife before discharge. Not only the patient, but we can do the discharge with the spouse as well. Um, he had signs of weakness, so we want to tell him that any signs of weakness, he needs to have assistance with his wife or call the primary care physician. We would also, with his medication, we would also give him the expected side effects. We would tell him that if he have an allergic reaction to it, that he contact the physician immediately. So allergic reaction, he contact the physician immediately, and we will tell him the possible side effects of the medication.